And that's not the only division the UK referendum exposed. Among the political fallout from the vote, Prime Minister David Cameron has announced he will resign.
I held nothing back. I was absolutely clear about my belief that Britain is stronger, safer and better off inside the European Union. And I made clear the referendum was about this and this alone, not the future of any single politician, including myself. But the British people have made a very clear decision to take a different path. And as such, I think the country requires fresh leadership to take it in this direction. I will do everything I can as Prime Minister to steady the ship over the coming weeks and months. But I do not think it would be right for me to try to be the captain that steers our country to its next destination. This is not a decision I've taken lightly, but I do believe it's in the national interest to have a period of stability and then the new leadership required.
Well, joining me now from London is CBS News senior foreign correspondent Mark Phillips. And from Washington, our newest correspondent for CBS News, Errol Barnett. Errol, welcome to you. And to you, Mark, I want to start with you. Mark, David Cameron said that he wasn't going to resign. No matter what happens in this vote, he was going to stick around. Well, now the referendum has happened. What changed?
Well, what changed was the result. He had campaigned, gambled. He's always been a gambler and always been a lucky one until now, on a win. He had gambled that the country would, in the end, vote to stay in, even if narrowly. And, of course, that's what the polls had predicted in the run-up to the vote. But he clearly underestimated a couple of factors, a dominant one being the great fear here of immigration, overstated in some cases. Hordes coming in from the east, not just Eastern Europe, but refugees from the Middle East as well. That's a fear that was stoked by the Leave campaign. It seems to have resonated with the working classes who feel threatened to some extent, as you were mentioning a minute ago. And the vote swung the wrong way for him. In fact, this morning, 70 or so of his own MPs had written to him, say, stay on, no matter what happens. There was an attempt to heal bridges, build bridges and heal wounds, even as the vote was being counted. But this was a huge shock to him. He had been, as I say, lucky until now. He gambled on this and he lost. And I think that he thought that he could not, in good heart, carry on the negotiations, the very complicated negotiations that will now be necessary to extricate Britain from the EU. This is going to be a messy divorce, and he apparently just wants nothing to do with it.
Errol, you actually have British roots. I want to ask you the reaction also from London. Folks, you know, there was a clear breakdown of people who voted to remain versus leave. We know there was a divide between millennials and older voters. Does that surprise you?
Not necessarily. There also, Irina, seems to be a divide between those who are basing this decision on factual information in front of them and others who are essentially voting their conscience, voting because of feelings. If you break down some of the polling data that we've taken a look at, it seems that within the age range of 25 to 65, the British electorate was evenly split. However, when you look at those younger than 25, they overwhelmingly wanted to remain as part of the EU. 40% of them either weren't sure or wanted to participate in the Brexit. On the complete opposite side of the spectrum, those over 65 overwhelmingly wanted to be a part of the Brexit by some 60%. So 60% of those under 25 wanted to remain, 60% of those over 65 wanted to enact the Brexit. And when you think about what the experience is of people in that age range, I just got off the phone with my mother, who was born in Liverpool, and she'll kill me for telling you she was born in the 1950s, and she made the note that that was a prosperous time for the UK. That was a time when it really did span the globe, and there was a lot of opportunities, union jobs, and opportunities for people to prosper. If you compare that to what happened after the UK joined the EU in the 1970s, those things started to dwindle. And with more immigrants coming from Central and Eastern Europe, that laid the groundwork for an anti-immigrant sentiment that now, since the 2008 financial crisis, has really only deepened. So I don't think it's any surprise that older voters wanted to participate in the Brexit and younger voters wanted to stay, but the extent to which they felt passionate about this and turned out to the polls, I think has surprised many, particularly David Cameron.
Mark, I want to talk to you also about the geographical breakdown of the people who voted in particular for this. What can you tell us about exactly who was for leaving the EU?
There was a big split. London went overwhelmingly to stay in the EU, and significantly Scotland voted as well. And there were a few other urban pockets around, but around the length and breadth of the country, there was a huge and obviously significant vote to leave. And this is going to have fallout. We've already heard today from Nicola Sturgeon, who's the head of the Scottish Nationalist Party, up there, saying that as far as she's concerned, Scotland wants to stay in the European Union, and that the idea of another referendum in Scotland is now on the table. This is a big lever that she has, and it wouldn't be a bit of a surprise if we're back here talking referendum in the next year or two as these negotiations over Europe continue.
Errol, you were talking about how your mom said the 1950s was a period of great prosperity. I worry about this younger generation, folks who feel their income isn't rising, that they're not getting the jobs they want, that they can't buy a home. So what does this mean? It's going to largely impact them. What does this mean for them?
That's right. I mean, they're even making the point online that while people over 65 essentially were the tipping point for this vote, it's the younger generation who will have to pay the consequences of this in the decades to come. But what's interesting when you look at the views of millennials is that, and it's also true in the United States, they do appear to be very optimistic about the future. Millennials, of course, are growing up in a connected time of technology. The younger generation of people there in the UK are more diverse. I mean, myself, my mother being from the Liverpool area, my father's side of the family is from Jamaica, and so there are these second and third generation people who have roots all around the world and are more open to that type of immigration and fewer borders. So it remains to be seen how this will be dealt and what their future will look like, but it just speaks to the enormous number of challenges that face not just the incoming UK Parliament as it reshuffles who's in charge, but also the European Union as a whole. It wants the UK to quickly figure out how to make the Brexit happen while it faces other right-wing nationalist challenges in its own members. So we could continue to see a knock-on domino effect from this single vote.
Many people worried about that very situation. Mark, what happens next from the political process? I mean, is there any way that Parliament would step in and just throw this entire referendum vote out?
No, if anything, what this vote has demonstrated is the disconnect, at least on this issue, between Parliament, most of which, certainly on the Labour side of the House, was very strongly in favor of staying in, although there are huge questions which have now arisen over the conduct of the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, who's now facing a leadership challenge of his own here and the rest of the country. And, this is a binding vote. There's nothing that Parliament can do about it. There's some suggestion here that the UK government would like to take a more measured approach to this very complex disassociation negotiation that has to proceed from here, but the Europeans are saying, no, you voted out, let's get on with it and let's do this. And as we've just been discussing, there's a real fear in Europe that there could be a domino effect. There are significant movements to get out of the EU in France and in Sweden and in other countries as well, and this will give them great heart. There's also the question as to how lenient a deal, how favorable a deal Britain gets from the EU in these negotiations. The Leave campaign here has said, oh, they'll want us, they'll give us a sweetheart deal, they still want to sell us their German cars and what have you, but Angela Merkel has an election coming up very soon. There's an election coming up in France as well, and both of them are very much in a situation of wanting to demonstrate strength as well. The last thing Europe needs at this point going forward is more of these kinds of movements developing in the remaining countries.
And it seems like that could very well be the case. Errol, I want to talk to you about some Google searches. Google actually released data on trending searches after this referendum vote, and they found the second most popular Google search was, what is the EU? What's your take on that?
Not surprised by that. I mean, I've also saw other online commentary from people who voted to make the Brexit happen, saying things like, what have I done? We don't know what impact this vote will have, because this is uncharted territory for the EU. It really will test the limits of in what ways Britain can remain a part of the European bloc. Prime Minister Cameron saying this does not change the status for Brits living in the EU and vice versa. But as I mentioned, the European Commission President wants the UK to act swiftly to decide how it will renegotiate some of the trade deals. We don't know exactly if the EU is even a success. Many people believe it was an attempt at a solid bloc to counter the dominance economically of the United States globally, but with crisis after crisis, from the refugee migrant crisis to Russia's intervention in Ukraine to these economic issues and cross-border travel, many people feel as if this is just the first domino to fall in the UK. So it's likely that many more people will search what is the EU. And also, I just want to note there was an interview early this morning by Nigel Farage, who headed up the UKIP party. The UK Independence Party has really pushed an anti-immigrant sentiment, many feel, and he admitted that many of the claims they made, that £350 million, which right now is worth about $520 million, would be back in UK coffers, go back to the National Health Service, and he admitted that's nowhere near what will happen. So acknowledging that one aspect that sold many people on this vote isn't true. I think a lot of people will be scratching their heads in the weeks to come.
Okay, Errol Barnett from our Washington Bureau and Mark Phillips with what appears to be a new goatee. Mark, looks great. Take care, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.